Louis, Director of the Issam Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs at AUB, and I'm very happy to welcome you all for Karen Abu Zayd's second talk here at AUB. We're particularly pleased to have her today. She's nearing the end of her mission as Commissioner General of UNRWA, and her basic background, as you know, is that she's been Commissioner General of UNRWA since June 2005, and she served before that for 5 years as Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations and Deputy Commissioner General of UNRWA. Before that, she worked for some years with the UN High Commissioner for Refugees for 19 years. But I'm particularly happy that she's with us because I see Karen Abu Zayd as the embodiment of the best of the United Nations. She represents, I think, a combination of quality service delivery, compassion at the human level, realism in a difficult political environment, but above all, she has emerged, I think, and many of her colleagues in UNRWA have emerged as champions of a sense of basic human dignity, decency, and the affirmation of international law. This is a rare combination among anybody working in the Middle East, particularly in the difficult environment of the Arab-Israeli conflict and its ramifications. And I think Karen Abu Zayd exemplifies that spirit of reminding the world that there's not just a human obligation to care for refugees. There's not only a legal obligation to implement UN resolutions and other things of that nature, but there's also a moral obligation to remember the linkages between the letter of the law, of international humanitarian law, of UN resolutions, of UN conventions, the linkages between all those words on paper and the conditions of human beings in need, and that linkage is political will to work harder and harder to try to resolve this conflict on the basis of law in a manner that is acceptable to all sides, Palestinians, Israelis, other Arabs, all concerned parties. And she has spoken out particularly eloquently, I think, on this issue, and she is here today to give us an overview of what a lecture that she has called The Regional Perspective on Conflict and Exile, Reflections on the Palestine Refugee Experience. So please welcome and join me in welcoming Karen Abu Zayd.
Your kind words. Esteemed faculty, distinguished guests, colleagues, friends of UNRWA, I thank the Issam Institute and the American University of Beirut for organizing this event and for the opportunity to share a few thoughts with you tonight. At the end of this year, I shall retire as Commissioner General of UNRWA, bringing to a close 28 years of service for refugees, the last 9 of these working with Palestine refugees in this region. In preparing for this lecture, I found myself looking back at some of the refugee experiences I've witnessed firsthand and the high points of major operations in which I was involved with UNHCR. I thought about the complex ways in which these operations reflect and diverge from the challenging conditions of Palestine refugees. Time and again, I've seen played out in many scenarios the progression of refugee situations from the stage of persecution and conflict, which trigger flight, to the period of asylum and exile, to the phase of durable solutions through which the refugee plight is resolved. No two refugee situations are identical. Still, there is a likeness into some aspects of the refugee experience, particularly as regards the initial circumstances of flight and the ultimate stage where refugee status is resolved. When people are compelled to flee, abandoning their homes and livelihoods and becoming estranged from their roots, the resulting pain and trauma are the same, regardless of the geographic location or national During the period of asylum or exile, the international community, including host countries and communities, are duty-bound to ensure for refugees the enjoyment of human rights and fundamental freedoms to the fullest extent possible. The conditions under which refugees live should meet minimum standards stipulated in human rights instruments, and access to health, education, social services, and other facilities should assure reasonable human development prospects for refugees and their families. There is a well-established international framework of instruments, principles, and practice for protecting refugees, whether they live in or outside camps. These are of universal application because they draw their inspiration from the United Nations values, human rights law, and from the laws of war, which protect civilians from the effects of armed conflict. There are, however, wide variations in their actual application. The extent to which refugees' conditions meet the required standards depend upon the capacity and the willingness of the host government, the international community, and concerned agencies to ensure the realization of these standards. This is an issue to which I'll return. As with the circumstances of flight, the common features of the global refugee experience are apparent when, following interventions on the political level, conflicts are peacefully resolved through negotiations. Over the years, many disputes of the most intense kind have eventually been brought to a peaceful and usually with the involvement of the international community and within the framework of international accords. As combatants lay down their arms, conditions are created that enable refugees to avail themselves of one or another of three durable solutions: resettlement in third countries, integration in the host community, or return to their homes and places of origin, the preferred solution. Each of these solutions establishes a foundation on which refugees reclaim some of what they lost and lay to rest the burdens of dispossession and exile. Durable solutions offer the means by which refugees restore their sense of self and seize the prospects for normal lives of dignity and opportunity. When we set the situation of Palestinians and Palestine refugees against the backdrop of these global norms, we see points of intersection, principally in the human impact of the events surrounding the original displacement. In common with other refugees, Palestinians suffered during the onset of their exile, or the Nakba, in 1948. The ensuing decades have not diminished the sharpness of the collective Palestinian memory of the pain of dispossession. As their refugee condition has persisted, passing the 60th milestone last year, so has the demand for their rights remained strong. In keeping with the universal refugee ethos, the passage of time and a succession of generations are powerless against the strength of the desire for justice and for a principled solution, which includes the possibility of reconnection with the place they call home. In other aspects of what is often called the refugee cycle, the circumstances of exile and the stage of solutions, the Palestine refugee experience deviates, often significantly, from the trends and patterns elsewhere. The major areas of divergence are the conditions of Palestinian exile and the protracted elusiveness of a solution. With regard to the conditions of exile, we would be hard-pressed to identify in the Middle East a place where Palestinian refugees fully satisfy the minimum standards of human rights, human security, and equal opportunity for development. Allow me briefly to consider the situation Palestine refugees face across the region. Refugees residing in Jordan and Syria enjoy the broadest spectrum of freedoms. They have economic rights and access to the employment market. And the stability of these countries means they're spared the trauma and risks associated with armed conflict. In both countries, refugee choices are constrained more by poverty and UNRWA's own lack of funds to maintain the quality of its programs than by any restrictions imposed by the authorities. Among the most fortunate are the refugees in Jordan, who enjoy the privilege of special categories of Jordanian passports. The advantages flowing from residents in Jordan and Syria, welcome and beneficial as they are, do not obviate the vulnerability inherent in the status of Palestinians as refugees. The benefits cannot substitute for a just and lasting solution to their plight. The occupied Palestinian territory is an example of human rights denied and fundamental freedoms physical impediments and the rigid application of harsh policies and laws. They are segregated and contained in zones whose boundaries are marked by the illegal separation barrier and some 592 checkpoints and roadblocks. Israeli settlements consume large tracts of Palestinian land for settler housing, settler farms, security areas, buffer zones, access roads, and bypass roads from which Palestinians are barred. As a consequence of these measures and the invasive infrastructure of occupation, Palestinian residents are effectively confined in a mosaic of enclaves. Freedom of movement for Palestinians and their goods does not exist, certainly not in the sense in which human rights instruments intend. They are unable to fully access their land, their work, and in some cases, healthcare, schools, their families, and places of worship. Palestinian livelihoods are held captive and their social and economic lives smothered. Poverty, unemployment, and the absence of dignity have become fixtures in a bleak existence. Included in the climate of abuses in the West Bank is the practice of demolishing Palestinian homes or evicting Palestinians from their homes. Some observers see a systematic approach gradually reducing the Palestinian population in and around East Jerusalem, which may well result in a zone of significant size completely free of Palestinians. I must also mention the frequency with which Palestinians are arrested and imprisoned, often without trial. Arbitrary arrests and invasions of personal liberty and freedom disproportionately affect young Palestinian men. Although the over 8,000 Palestinians in Israeli prisons include 60 women and 390 children. The evidence on the ground and the absence of any normalcy in the lives of Palestinians and Palestine refugees provide little cause for optimism. In a report published last month, the World Bank expresses reservations about reports of recovery in the West Bank, noting that the steps to ease restrictions in the West Bank, I quote, lack permanence and certainty and can easily be withdrawn or replaced with other restrictions, unquote. So much gloom hangs over the West Bank. What might we say about Gaza? Since the onset of the Second Intifada, Palestinians in Gaza have been assailed by an array of adverse experiences. The closure of Gaza's borders since June 2007 and the 22-day war last winter are only two of the most recent low points in the lives of Gazans. The blockade preceded the war, the recent war, and intensified after it. Food, medical supplies, and humanitarian aid are allowed in, but only in quantities carefully regulated to remain below basic needs. Headline news is made by announcements that tea, coffee, and 3,000 cows will be allowed into Gaza ahead of the coming Eid al-Adha holiday. The economy, such as it is, now revolves around the entrance and exit of goods through a complex of underground tunnels. And the construction industry is experimenting with the manufacturing of building materials from mud and the recycling of rubble from the recent conflict. However, no amount of ingenuity can mask the malnutrition and deep poverty affecting 80% of the population, unemployment, and collapse of public services, which are the legacy of the deliberate isolation of Gaza. Poverty surveys conducted by UNRWA's Social Services Department show that the number of abject poor, those completely unable to support themselves without humanitarian assistance, has tripled in recent months to reach 300,000 out of 1.1 million refugees. The economy and the conditions of siege are not only the only sources of misery. The firing of Issam rockets from Gaza into Israel continues, although at a low frequency, while the response from the Israeli side remains robust, frequently causing death and injury. In Gaza, a ceasefire does not necessarily mean the silence of guns, the cessation of hostilities, or an end to the civilian casualties. All too often, periods of quiet have turned out to be opportunities to prepare for further eruptions of violence. Allow me now to focus on Lebanon. Here, the currents of vulnerability are very much in evidence. From UNRWA's vantage point, there are several strands that converge to threaten the well-being of refugees today. Prominent among these is the memory of the role Palestinians played in Lebanon's history of internal unrest and civil conflict. Closely connected with the Palestinian influence and Lebanon's civil wars is the complex fragility of the country's ethnic and religious constitution and the fine complexes that are necessary refactored the susceptibility to intrusions by regional and international forces, both state and non-state actors, each with its own priorities and agendas, and ready to exploit, including by military force, any frailties. Within the Palestinian camps itself, there are divisions and struggles for political power, some of which reflect the internecine splits between Fatah and Hamas, generating their own ripples of instability. Amidst this intricate matrix sits the community of Palestine refugees, itself reflecting the complexities, and at the same time reinforcing them. The camps in which some 50% of the refugees reside are a stage on which Lebanon's complex realities are played out. In the years since the early 1990s, there's been a progressive isolation of Palestine refugees in Lebanon, both in a physical sense of limiting their presence to the camps, and in terms of the constriction in the scope of economic and civil rights that they enjoy. Palestine refugees are not ascribed a legal status in Lebanon. Beyond what UNRWA can provide with its limited means and stretched facilities, the refugees have little access to medical care and social safety net assistance. Prior to 2005, Lebanese law specified 70-some professions from which refugees were excluded. The Minister of Labor has since reduced that number to 20 professions and vocations, with medicine, pharmacy, law, and engineering still prohibited, and the easing of the employment ban yet to take real effect. Over the years, these restrictions have contributed to a high incidence of chronic poverty and high unemployment among Palestine refugees, which in turn compounds their marginalization. This fundamental insecurity is reinforced by the dim prospects of a just and durable solution to their plight. In Lebanon's climate of constant political jousting, some political factions exaggerate the risks of Tautim, settlement, thus stoking these fears for their own ends. Sporadic episodes of violence in the refugee camps play to long-standing national anxieties regarding the Palestinian presence. The armed conflict in UNRWA in 2007, which resulted in the total destruction of the refugee camp and the forced displacement of its 27,000 residents, demonstrated the vulnerability of Palestine refugees on a scale not seen for many years, while also underlining the close interlocking between their interests and those of the Lebanese communities which host them. At the same time, there are undoubted advantages to a gradual opening up of the refugee camps. Marginalization and entrenched poverty have never served the ends of security or stability. On the contrary, restrictions breed radicalism and create an atmosphere in which disaffected youth become receptive to the call of militancy and violence. Boosting economic activity, raising standards of living, and expanding life choices are goals whose benefits will extend beyond the camp boundaries. These benefits will eventually include the fostering of a climate in which camp residents define and seek their common security in non-belligerent terms. It is UNRWA's hope that it will be possible to build on the positive signals from the government and others to generate agreement on a program to accelerate the liberalization of economic opportunities for Palestine refugees in Lebanon. To achieve this, a broad consensus across political lines is essential, as is the consent and support of the refugees themselves, obtained through a process of genuine consultations. It will also be vital for the objectives of liberalization to be framed along lines that are neither political nor adversarial, and which steer clear of preconditions that might play into the hands of confrontational elements or risk triggering militant reactions. Ensuring that refugees enjoy living conditions that meet human rights standards is a discrete, non-political, international legal obligation. It is a goal whose pursuit is justified in and of itself by consideration of humanity and cannot be confused with naturalization or any other durable solution. These observations apply to all refugee camps in Lebanon, and they have a particular relevance to the rebuilding of UNRWA to enable its residents to reclaim the dignity of lives free from dependence on humanitarian assistance. Since the tragic events of 2007, and notwithstanding the frustrations and the slow pace of the reconstruction effort, there have been the indications of constructive attitudes among a range of interlocutors, and with them the potential of rebuilding UNRWA to serve as a catalyst for new beginnings. There's the possibility, for example, that in a newly rebuilt camp, security and policing arrangements could depart from the prevailing practice and be based on genuine cooperation between refugees and the Lebanese government. The donor conference in Vienna in 2008, June, raised some $120 million of the $445 million appeal for the reconstruction effort. While the pledges fell below our expectations, they are adequate for the purpose of commencing the construction process. And we appreciated the supportive statements of the majority of delegations, including from the Arab world, most of which acknowledged without reservation the refugees' entitlement to have their community rebuilt and recognized the link between reconstruction and the security of the Lebanese communities around Beirut. Not only in connection with the rebuilding of Beirut, but also more generally, UNRWA is heartened by the efforts of the Lebanese Palestinian Dialogue Committee, LPDC. In spite of its constraints and the impediments to discharging its mandate, the LPDC's very existence testifies to the possibility of bridging decades of distance and placing the Lebanese-Palestinian relationship on a cooperative footing of consultations, mutual trust, and shared interests. The committee's focus on concrete, practical steps to enhance Palestinian living conditions is particularly welcome. There's been a constructive attitude of the Lebanese government since 2005 and its readiness to confront difficult issues of Palestinian rights in new and courageous ways. Support from government, unequivocal, consistent support, is an indispensable ingredient in ensuring assistance and protection to refugees, particularly in the fraught environment of Lebanon. The effectiveness of the humanitarian and human development role of UNRWA and other agencies wholly depends on this. Distinguished colleagues, the Palestine refugee condition is severely challenged across our region. The gloom of the Palestinian condition of exile is matched by dim horizons for a just and durable solution to their plight. In the normal course of things, endeavors to end conflict and to create solutions are shared responsibilities, lying squarely in the political realm and shared by the refugees, the country of asylum, country of origin, along with the international community and one of the refugee agencies, and peculiar to the Palestine refugee situation, by a hostile neighbor and occupying power. Ideally, Israelis and Palestinians should be in the vanguard, exerting good faith efforts, restraining their recourse to the force of arms, and actively exploring areas of compromise. The international community should be playing an enabling role, ensuring balance, serving as a trusted, impartial guarantor, if not enforcer, of international law, bringing even-handed leverage to bear equally on both sides, and fostering an inclusive negotiation climate in which relevant constituencies are given a fair opportunity to contribute to a representative outcome. This ideal scenario is not an impossible utopian vision. Over the last 2 decades, such a vision has played out in reality in several conflicts and refugee situations around the globe. Yet there have been precious few occasions when this ideal tableau could be said to reflect the actuality of the negotiation process in the Middle East. As things currently stand, the disparity between the peace process as it is and as it ought to be is as wide as it had ever been. The defects on all sides are many and grave. Deep divisions among Palestinians deny them the united front they need, and looming uncertainties about the future leadership of the Palestinian Authority give new voice to the question, who speaks for the people of Palestine? On the Israeli side, the stance on the settlement issue remains rigid and at odds with the spirit of compromise, as presumed U.S. support fuels confidence in the ability to hold Palestinian demands at bay. The international community, for its part, has for some time abdicated its proper role as custodian of a principled, inclusive process that is governed by a genuine concern for the long-term interests of both Israelis and Palestinians. Instead, we've seen a peace process in name, but not in substance, in form, but not in content. We've seen the position of honest broker fall vacant and remain unfilled for long months. In its place is the inclination to refrain from holding both sides equally to account, while providing an open license for abuses that threaten the Palestinian soul and irreversibly corrode the foundations of the Palestinian state. From my perspective as the head of UNRWA, I'm deeply concerned by the lack of attention to the refugee question, stemming partly from its designation as a final status issue to be addressed at a later stage of negotiations. The slow pace and erratic progress of these negotiations means, however, that final status matters, including the refugee issue, are in effect indefinitely postponed. From the vantage point of refugee protection, to shunt the refugee issue into the shadows is counterintuitive and contrary to the lessons learned from conflicts long resolved. Refugees are the human manifestation of the pathological effects of conflict. As long as their situation is not definitively addressed, the conflict remains extant. By the same token, taking early steps toward resolving their state of dispossession could contribute significantly to tackling the roots of the conflict. There are other considerations arguing for early rather than delayed attention to this matter. Genuine processes of consultation with refugees themselves must be at the heart of any effort to identify solutions. Refugee interests must be clarified and their concerns determined, and they must be provided with the information they need to make informed choices. Given the foreseeable operational complexities, and bearing in mind the present size of the refugee community, a timely beginning to the consultation process would be wise. Colleagues, the picture of conflict and exile I have sketched is not a pretty one. However, it represents the reality, as I see it, of the trials and exile that Palestinians and Palestine refugees endure across our region. Yet these trials are not theirs alone. They are ours as well, because when, through negligence, acquiescence, or indifference, we, as an international community, deny to Palestinians their rights and freedoms, our own culpability is engaged. Palestinian questions are not in a world apart. They impinge on our world, our interests, and our security. If the prospects are ominous for Palestinians, then the outlook is bleak for all of us as well. The converse also holds true. If we could only fulfill the legitimate and enduring Palestinian demand for a state of their own, and if we could work with fresh urgency to secure with Palestine refugees a solution that is just and lasting, then all of us, Palestinians, Israelis, and the international community, would reap the fruits of a more peaceful, prosperous region and a more stable world. That day cannot come soon enough. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen. We'll open it up to questions in the middle there. Please identify yourself and ask a brief question if you could.
Ali Waidi, representative of Family Organization for the Right of Return and Palestinian Refugee living in Lebanon. I have a few questions on 3 levels, please. The first level is about UNRWA donations and fundings. The other level is about protection. The third is about refugees' perspective of UNRWA. About donation, as we know, UNRWA voluntarily funded by different countries. My first question, is it a conditioned donations? The second, is it a conditioned donations? My question. The second question, what is the future of UNRWA if countries start their donations? My third question, why UNRWA budget is not a part of United Nations budget? The fourth, if there is any possibility to discuss UNRWA funding in the General Assembly. My second question is about second level.
Sorry, I need your first one again.
You can't ask like a book of questions, just 1 or 2, and then if there's time we'll come back to you, because let her answer the questions that you asked already.
Okay. I'm going to skip the first one because I didn't hear it. We will not contemplate the future of UNRWA without funding, and I don't think we have any indications that the donor community is ready to do that. In fact, just the opposite. Despite the fact that we have funding difficulties, is because we have greater needs every year, but we also see that we get more money every year. So the donors have not abandoned us, have no intention of doing so, and in fact what we're seeing is that our donor base is expanding, it's diversifying, as we're always asked to do, and we're getting also a lot more money from the Arab Gulf countries, as I referred to in my talk. No need to worry about donor funding stopping. Now the question of why we're not part of the UN budget, we are part, like many other agencies, voluntarily funded agencies. Many of the humanitarian and human development agencies have to raise their own funds, as we do every year. For UNRWA, the part of the UN budget that comes to us is for our international staff. So all of our international staff costs are covered by the UN budget, which we have to defend every year in New York as well. We are, in fact, in a process for the first time, thanks to the working group on the funding of UNRWA, a small body in New York that is chaired by Turkey, going to the General Assembly with some ideas on changing some of this, expanding the amount of money that the UN budget will give us. It wouldn't be a lot more, but at least more to cover some additional things that are demanded of us by the United Nations. And then if we have to pay from our voluntary funds, that deprives refugees from some of those funds. So those are the two things we are going to do. And we can maybe talk about your other questions afterwards.
Hi, my name is Tynan Kelly. I'm a master's student here at the American University of Beirut. I know that in general, UNRWA's education system, at least the curriculum, is dictated by its host country. But for some things like religion, especially here in Lebanon, where there's not a central curriculum, how does UNRWA choose curriculum and teach it to Palestinian refugees?
Just to say, yes, we use the curriculum of the host authority wherever we are, and so in each of the countries we're using the local curriculum, but we do have our own enhancement curriculum. Just give me a chance to say that on human rights, conflict resolution, and tolerance, which is something that sometimes now the host countries have come to us to also want to do the same kind of thing. Is there something special about our schools in Lebanon? I'm asking the director of Lebanon about using the host authority. But yes, but I think the question is, what do we do when there are different religions? Well, yes, we use whichever one is used for that particular community. Okay, so
My name is Philip Davies Manera, and we respect the work that you do in the Middle East. What further can UNRWA do to break the siege of Gaza?
Very little. We could be considered to be breaking it in the sense that we are the ones that are allowed most generously to bring in what we need for just our basic food distributions and primary healthcare clinics. Breaking the siege or stopping the blockade or even reducing it is something that we, as others, have had very little success with, because the Israeli condition at this point in time about breaking the siege is the release of Staff Sergeant Shalit. So unless the Israeli soldier is released, the crossings will not be opened. It's just firm. There's no business even discussing it. So we have regular meetings, we write regular letters, and we've tried a number of things, like let's just do water and sanitation projects. Let's just bring in the things that are needed for these, because these things affect the Israelis as well, because we're dumping millions of liters of sewage into the sea every single day. That goes north, some of it maybe comes all the way up. And we get to a certain point in the negotiations where we're down to, how many nails and pipes are we bringing in, and yet we never seem to conclude them. We tried another tack, all the agencies, the UN agencies, on let us finish old projects from even the Second Intifada, not even from this last war. Let us just finish those off. Let us bring the materials in. They know that the materials we bring in go to our projects and are not diverted anywhere, but that doesn't matter. They do not want anything going into Gaza that will help Hamas, help strengthen Hamas, because things are better for the people. It's just a punishment that's there for everyone who lives in Gaza, and there's not much we could do about it. So it's good when these various convoys come and the Free Gaza ships come in. The Miles for Miles convoy that's been sitting in Egypt for several weeks got in today, part of it, the rest of it tomorrow. So more people that keep pressing on this, the more we might have some success just to get more things in. But as I mentioned, I usually give a very long list of what's not allowed in, besides basic foods and medicines, which is a real problem because even clothes, shoes, things that growing children need, they don't come in. Coffee, tea, as I mentioned, chocolate, nuts, anything, they're just not there. And but they are there only because of the tunnels. So that is what we say. We've created a very artificial economy. There have been a lot of articles in the last week you may have seen on what it's doing to the children because many are going to work in the tunnels. Well over 100, maybe 130, maybe 160 people have died in the tunnels. So it's a tragic situation, and we'll just keep struggling and fighting for it. And I'm not sure that even when Staff Sergeant Shalit is released, if he is, there seem to be negotiations again, we're told, near conclusion. We're still not sure that they won't revert to other conditions, revert back to the quartet conditions, which would then be another problem, and the crossings will stay closed. By the way, just for your information, I was in New York last week presenting our annual report, and there were huge debates over whether we could even call this a blockade, because legally it's not a blockade. It's supposedly not from the stage of the war. And so I suggested that we call it a siege instead, but of course that was much worse for everyone. So we were allowed to say there were very tight restrictions on imports into Gaza. The very was also debated and finally agreed to.
If I could ask a question, the Goldstone report that was recently released from the United Nations Human Rights Council, what is your assessment of the importance or significance of that report, and do you think it will have any long-term impact on focusing attention on implementing the rule of law?
I think it's extremely important. It's an extremely good report, very fair. And I think, although it might not get through the Security Council, that what it has done, getting through the General Assembly, perhaps going further, be taken further, if not by the Security Council or the UN, maybe by others to the International Criminal Court. We'll see about that. But it certainly has created a great deal of anxiety in the region and in our neighbor, Israelis, and I think that has already made a difference, that they can't just dismiss this report, no matter how much they touch Goldstone personally. There are too many people who trust what he has done, what he was able to achieve in bringing out the report that he did, he and his team. So I can only say that it can only be positive. There are just little things developing all around of easing up on a few things around not just the West Bank, which has been happening a bit, but a little bit for Gaza that we think are responding to the Goldstone report and the reaction to the widespread reaction to the Goldstone report, the widespread report it had. Just hurrah for the Goldstone report.
No, my name is Samir Al-Khouri. I'm chair of Committee for Employment of Palestinian Refugees. Ms. Abu Zayd, could you elaborate on the protection role of UNRWA, in particular as it applies to Lebanon, and in what way is it linked to the right to employment?
Just to say that the protection role of UNRWA has been given more prominence in the last couple of years. We've actually created posts so that we have someone working full-time on this issue and trying to integrate the protection
My name is Birgit Kaspar. I'm a journalist with the German radio. If the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank were to break down, there have been threats in this regard from members of the PA in the last few days. What consequences would that have for your work? What kind of implications?
Well, I sincerely hope that doesn't happen, and I think we probably see that the Palestinians will come up with some kind of solution no matter how bad things get there. That's what they do. That's what I've seen them do in all the other events that have taken place over the 9 years I've been here, including here when we had the UNRWA crisis in Gaza, when we had the so-called CAS-led last winter. So I think that the Palestinians will manage somehow not to let things completely break down. On the other hand, if there were some problems with the authority, I think, as we saw in Gaza as well, the civil servants would carry on, and there would still be the kinds of things that we do, which is the schools and the clinics. So we're pretty independent in what we provide for the refugees in terms of the physical, material things that we do. Use the curriculum, but the teachers and so on, the school buildings, everything are ours for the schools. Same with primary health care. So our services would continue. I don't think they would be particularly affected. Now, if there were a real breakdown that somehow there wasn't, the civil servants weren't working, we would have problems because, of course, we also rely on the Palestinian Authority for things like medicines for our clinics, vaccinations, things like this. So there would certainly be some effects, but for the most part, we would be carrying on. What we might find is that if there were some problem with the services provided to non-refugees, that we might have people coming in and asking to use our services as well. That would be a problem, of course.
Somebody right next to her there, yeah. No, in the middle, right, yeah.
My name is Janet McKnight, Human Rights Watch. I have a question about the reconstruction of UNRWA. Is there any change in the relationship between UNRWA and the land of the old camp now that it has been expropriated for rebuilding? And also, will it be the responsibility of UNRWA or in cooperation with the Lebanese government and the popular committees to redistribute the homes as they are built?
I didn't get it. What's the change in relationship between UNRWA and...
Now that the land has been expropriated for rebuilding, will there be any change in the relationship between the who owns the land or the UNRWA's responsibility for it?
What? Yeah, that's why I'm not sure of the question, because the land has been expropriated. It's now government land. It's now it's going to be rebuilt on it.
Okay, I guess then the second question is the responsibility of UNRWA to redistribute the homes as they're built.
To what?
Redistribute the homes.
To redistribute the homes in the camp?
Yes.
Oh, maybe you should go and visit. This has been the most marvelous exercise from the very beginning. I visited, during when the war was still going on, there was already a volunteer committee from the refugees themselves who were already drawing up the maps and agreeing on every house and every window and every balcony and everything of what was going to be the rebuilt camp. And so there's a plan there, a complete plan for rebuilding the camp in consultation with the refugees, with all the engineers, with the government, with the army. All of these things are in great detail laid out. There's a whole master plan that's been agreed on.
Thank you.
Way at the back, and then we'll do this. First back there, way up top. Yeah, way up the lady up top. And then we'll move back to this side here.
Thank you. My name is Becky Katz. I'm a student here at AUB. And my question is about the condition of the camps in Lebanon. For instance, the Burj al-Barajni camp, where there are electric blackouts, sometimes for days, and the water isn't potable, and the waste collection is inefficient, sometimes non-existent. Are the conditions of the camp so desperate because the Lebanese government handles these services? And if so, if the government has difficulty in delivering these basic goods and services, does UNRWA step in to advocate on behalf of the Palestinians in the camps? And what's the general policy that UNRWA has in managing the camps, again in regards to goods and services, in the rest of the region? Thank you very much.
Start with the last first. Is the camps are managed and administered not by UNRWA. We manage just what we call our installations, that is the schools and clinics in the camps. We of course have camp service officers who work with the social services and try to improve the services, but as you noted, most of the services are provided by the local authority of some sort. We're aware of the unfortunate conditions in some of the camps. Bourges is a particular one that's been in the news lately because of the sewage and the water problems. We've been working with the government, as I said again, since 2005, quite closely with the whole notion of improving the living conditions in the camps. One reason they're in such bad shape is that for many years we weren't allowed to do anything in them. The refugees themselves weren't allowed to do anything in them. They were to stay the way they were, kind of a monument to refugeehood or something. But now, with the government, working quite closely with the government, we devised $50 million worth of projects to improve living conditions in the camps. We went out together fundraising. We had a donor conference here and elsewhere, and were able to raise about half of that and began some of this work in some of the camps. We will get to all of them eventually. We will raise the rest of the money. We've all sort of committed in the last months to, now that we're finally getting Beirut back on track, or not just on track, that we can now look again at what we need to do for all the other camps.
Let's move over to this side, yeah, right there. The lady next to you, and then,
Hi, my name is Dalila Mahtawi. I'm from the Daily Star newspaper. Now, out of all the Palestinian refugees, the Palestinians in the gatherings in Lebanon are arguably one of the most vulnerable. Why isn't UNRWA more present in these communities? Thank you.
Well, I think we do some things in the gatherings, but not a lot to write, because there are refugees here, for example, Palestine refugees who are not registered with us. They're registered with the government and not with us. There are refugees who aren't registered with anyone, and non-ID refugees. And our particular mandate is for the ones who are registered with us and are in need. So, what we do and what others do with or without our encouragement is to hope that there are NGOs that help a lot in the gatherings. These are things that we have a difficulty with in all our fields as well, not just Lebanon, that if there are refugees who are Palestinian but who are not registered with us because they don't meet the specific definition, or they don't bother to register or want to register, then it is something that we have to stand a little bit away from, because we don't have the agreements to offer services to them.
the fellow in the middle there.
Okay. I'm Qasim Saad, chairman of Developmental Action Without Borders, NADA. Just I have two questions. The first one, which is, what accountability plan that UNRWA they have, and how that's this accountability plan related to the General Secretary bulletin? The second question, what the procedures UNRWA they take or they put in place to increase the level of participation of those refugees who are living inside the camps? Thank you.
Could you repeat your first question? I hope I've understood.
The first one or the second one?
First one, I didn't hear.
The first one, it is what accountability plan you have in UNRWA. And this accountability plan, how much related to the General Secretary bulletin?
Did you ask what is UNRWA's political plan?
No, accountability plan.
Accountability plan.
Accountability. And what related to the Secretary General. Well, funny you should ask that. This is a very popular buzzword, I think probably everywhere, but particularly in the United Nations right now. I've just come from meetings also with the Secretary General, that heads of funds and programs forums, as we call them, heads of agencies have twice a year. And this is a major topic. It was at this session, it was a major topic in the spring session, and it's something that we're working on quite well. Now, now that I'm leaving the UN, I can say this. What I thought was one of the best, we had a retreat on accountability even, and the UN heads of agencies. And what one person got up and said, accountability is really what we're talking about is management. And perhaps that's what it is. You know, we have all kinds of procedures we're setting up to show that we're accountable. It is certainly something very important, jokes aside, that UNRWA is taking very seriously within its reform program and making sure, especially as we try to become more modern, join the rest of the UN, and that's the relationship with the Secretary General and the rest of the UN, is to work on things like decentralization, to be more serious about things like needs-based planning, monitoring and evaluation, these sorts of things. And in order to do all of this, to decentralize and to have there be a decentralized also monitoring, evaluation, and all of these things, you have to develop accountability frameworks. People have to be responsible for what they're delegated to do. So we are part of the entire UN system. We're working on it not just because of that, but because we want UNRWA services to be more effective and efficient, as we say, and to meet these standards that are quite common now, I think, everywhere. The procedures that we use for refugee participation, is that what your second question was? It is something that, again, we are quite serious about and trying to ensure that we do this in every way we can. It's also part of our organizational development to involve refugees more in the decision-making that goes on. It was perhaps even started with our 30,000 staff to have more of them responsible for decisions at all levels. We've begun a lot of middle-level management training, and I think most of the staff who participated, these are Palestine Refugee staff, there are 30,000 staff who have found that they are, again, benefiting a lot and much more part of the organization and where it's going and what it's doing and how it's doing things.
Hi, I'm a master's student here at AUB. My question regards the decision-making in the camps, and I wanted to ask you, what's the role of the Popular Committee within the camps? What's their authority, and what's your relation to them? Thank you.
Sorry, the role of whom?
The Popular Committee. Yeah.
Well, they play a very important role. They make a lot of the decisions, and when you ask who administers the camps, and in many ways it's the Popular Committees that administer the camps, our relationship with them is to have frequent meetings with them. These are not shy bodies. They make sure that we know what they're thinking about things and so on. And so we have regular exchanges with them and try to do things whichever way we can, in ways that satisfy both them and us and the refugees in the camps.
Let me just add here, at our program on Palestinian camps, where we study camps all over the Middle East, we just had a 2-day workshop, and the audio of that in Arabic and English will be on the website very soon if you're interested. And the whole focus was on governance of the camps, or the administration or the management of the camps. And we did research studies in 5 camps all around the Middle East, in the 5 areas where there are camps. And this is the Popular Committees emerged as one of the really big but complex issues in terms of who has power, authority, legitimacy, service delivery capabilities. All of these things are mixed up because in every country there is a sovereign authority. Here is the Lebanese government, Syria, Jordan, but there are also other actors in the camps who have power, who have authority, who have legitimacy, who have influence, who have money, who have services, and in some cases who have weapons. So there's a very complex situation in the camps, and it's one of the issues that we're trying to study using dispassionate research and on-the-ground research and analysis, and also bringing together the many different Palestinian groups with the government, the host governments, UNRWA, and all the international community, all the interested people, to really study this situation very carefully, because it's not a good situation, and it needs to be addressed much more clearly. But the good news is that most people, certainly here in Lebanon at our two-day workshop, it was very clear that all of the players, the Palestinian groups, the PLO, the government of Lebanon, the security, the police forces, everybody is dissatisfied with the situation and wants to do something about it. So this is a moment of potential change, but it requires really daring leadership and good coordination on both sides. And then hopefully this is something that will happen soon. If any of you are interested in these issues, sign up outside, go to our website. We're going to be working on these issues in a very serious way, continuing to do research for some years. So anybody who's interested in being involved, we're always welcome. The lady there right in the middle, yeah, there, and then back up to the top.
Kristen Hope, a researcher. I'm just about this research, about these assessments that are being done. I'm just quite curious about UNRWA's policy of what sort of studies they do make available to public, because I know that, for example, there was a recent study done in education, are these things available? Are they being put on websites? Are they being published? Are they being accessible to independent researchers like myself? Thank you.
Was that for me?
Either.
We didn't actually hear exactly what you were asking.
It wasn't clear. Could you speak into the microphone more?
Is this clear? Okay. I'm a researcher, and for example, I was curious about, you were speaking about studies, assessments, and research that has been done, is being done, and is planned to be done. And I was wondering what the policy of making these resources public is, because I'm aware that several studies and assessments have been done, but they are not made available to the public. I don't know what they're not, they're made accessible either via websites or a printed publication. And if there was a policy on this, and if not, what what's your take on that? Thank you.
I will answer for our work. All of our work is designed to be public. Sometimes we have closed consultations where people need to discuss issues, but all of the research we do, the studies we do, is designed to be made public, because we are a public policy institute, and we feel that getting the public engaged is a critical part of ending up with good policies.
Yeah, I think the question probably was for you, Rami, but just to say, one of the other buzzwords besides accountability is transparency, and almost everything that we can put on the website, we put on our website, and starting with our budgets, we're putting all our whole curriculum, our education curriculum on the website, but it's, just go to www.unrwa.org and see what everything is there that we're trying to do. We don't do much research, but we provide a lot of data for other people's research.
The two ladies in the middle here.
Good evening. Thank you, first of all, Ms. Abu Zayd, for being here and speaking to us. I have two questions. My first question is about aid distribution, specifically maybe in Gaza, and how UNRWA distributes its aids and the criteria for the amount of aid, etc. My second question is in relation to Lebanon, and I wanted to ask you, you said since 2005 the Lebanese government has made a lot of positive efforts. You said the LPDC stands as a testimony to a willingness to cooperate. But my question is, for the past 4 years, how much have words been put into action? Thank you.
Our aid distribution, we have a special staff also tell me, we had discussions of this today too, that they feel it too, and with their relationships with the Lebanese public and so on, that they feel that there is a different atmosphere out there, a different relationship toward Palestine refugees. It's not wonderful, of course, as I also mentioned, but it's different and it's better, and it has been for the last almost 4 years.
The lady next to her there.
I have a question regarding the reconstruction of Nahr al-Bared. As we know, there has been a new security reform in the camp and the introduction of the police station inside the camp. What is your assessment of this new measure? Will it affect UNRWA's services, and what has been the local community's response to such a reform? Thank you.
Well, as I understand, it's how the information about this I just gathered a bit last night. The whole point of the reconstruction, or the whole approach to the reconstruction of the Narwhal camp is a neighborhood one, a regional one. And this $445 million that I mentioned isn't just for the camp. It's also for the surrounding areas and even the villages around about it. And the whole idea is for this to be eventually an example of what could happen all over Lebanon, that we actually have Lebanese security forces looking after the camp. So this is part of what's happening with putting the police station inside the camp. It is something that needs discussion with the community and is undergoing discussion with the community. And I know, again, some of the people doing research here are working on these issues and are finding that they, with discussion, the community understands what, how they become part of the region and neighborhood and so on, and are more accepting of what they thought would be a threat from Lebanese police inside our camp. No, it becomes something that's part of their protection.
If I would just add to that, from our experience again at our workshop and follow-up discussions we've had, it seems that rather than talking about policing the camps, there seems to be a consensus among both the Palestinians and the Lebanese that what you're talking about is implementing the rule of law, protecting all of the people, providing security, safety, stability, respecting the sovereignty of the Lebanese government, providing safety for the Palestinians so they can live in a safe condition, and doing this through a consultative process. This is really the key new, I would say, maybe breakthrough, maybe too strong a word, but the new sort of theme that is emerging now in Lebanese-Palestinian discussions about this issue. It's profoundly important that people are aware of this and trying to find ways to actually implement it in a manner that wasn't the case before. So there may be new ideas now, new mechanisms to work with, which will hold out a lot of promise. Fateh,
Thank you, Fateh Azam, with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Thank you, Karen, for your honest and also hopeful discussion, despite the difficulties that there are. What I would like to do is take us back a little bit to the very serious problem of Palestinian refugees who fall through the cracks. And these cracks are not only in terms of governmental policies around the region, but also in part because of UNRWA's rather very clear definition of a Palestinian refugee, which is still time limited in terms of those who became refugees during the 48 war and their descendants. As we know, we are dealing now with the problem of non-ID Palestinians here, refugees, for a variety of different reasons who no longer have any kind of a legal document. Now, through the good efforts of the Lebanese-Palestinian Dialogue Committee, there have been some stop-and-start efforts to register some of those, and a few have been, but there's still an issue. There's the issue of about 60,000 Palestinian refugees in Egypt, which by legal and international legal provision, UNHCR should be responsible for, but the Egyptian government will not hear any of that. There are also, the question there is luckily that's different for the Palestinians from Iraq who ended up stuck on the border, and I think a few of them are still there, but not too many. Most of them have been, their situation has been resolved. As far as I know, there are also Palestinian refugees stuck on the border between Libya efforts to deal with those particular communities of refugees. Have there been any efforts to redefine or revisit the UNRWA definition of Palestinian refugee? That's on one level. And secondly, advocacy efforts and communications with governments like the government of Egypt and others, Libya, Iraq, whatever, to try and help those who fall through the cracks.
Well, we haven't been very successful where we feel that we even are more, should be more responsible. For example, with the so-called 67 refugees from Gaza who are in Jordan. And so they call the Gaza refugees, or the 67 refugees, or the Jerash refugees, because they want to stay in Jerash camp. We try to do what we can, for example, for those we did because they're pretty close to Amman and donors Issam. Their conditions are much worse than other camps. So we've been able to garner some support for them, but that is not particularly welcomed by the Jordanian government, so we have to deal with that. And that's, whatever we do anywhere has to be done with the agreement of the government. The Egyptian, we don't do anything for them. Once upon a time we were there, but then we pulled out because they were well looked after under Nasser. Less well looked after now, and it's very difficult. We speak out from time to time when I'm there, for example, but it's not something that we can really do much about. Even when with friends in the government, it's not an issue you can even discuss. They just cut it off. So Palestinians from Iraq, these of course were under the auspices of UNHCR, so they were looked after by UNHCR, and they did a lot of work in consultation with us, in collaboration with us. We worked together. They funded us to do some things when we bring the refugees, especially in Syria, into our camps or give them schooling and so on. They raised the funds and gave them to us. So, and then as you say, they're all from the Jordanian Iraq border, and there are only a few hundred left in the Syrian Iraq border, and most of them are on the list for resettlement. So those that aren't, we are still negotiating on getting them into our camps or into a camp inside Syria. So something like that, somehow it was so visible and it was new, we could all work together on that. But these other ones that have been around for a long time, I think even including here in Lebanon, the non-ID Palestinians is something that we don't do a lot about as not in Egypt either.
Well,
Definition, just to say no. It's something like redefining your mandate. You better not try to do it because you'll probably get into big trouble and everything will be worse than before. So if we try to redefine the definition, we may find we would have a lot of criticism of what that definition, which is just our definition really, but it's been accepted, so we better just leave it alone and not fuss too much with it.
we're going to take one more. The lady here with the kafee, because Karen has a 6:30 appointment, so we need to take one more question.
Hi, my name is Zana Hindi. I'm a master's student here at AUB. And I have a question that touches more on the psychological, philosophical notion of refugeehood. The title of this talk was Notions of Exile. And you briefly touched on this in one of your answers to the question about the abject conditions in the camps in Lebanon. But I'm wondering if, in your experience, you have any perspectives or experiences on the idea of Palestinian refugees living in the camps, using or being used because of their positionality as refugees, living in these abject conditions, for the purpose of their cause and for the continuity of the struggle and narrative of return.
If your question is this one about keeping refugees in camps and keeping refugees poor in order to one day get the Palestinian state or use it for a right of return and so on, I don't think that that happens. I don't think that's true anymore. As we say, only a third of the refugees, 4.6 million refugees, only a third of them live in camps. Even here in Lebanon, where it's through education and things, but Palestinians maybe more than any of them, and that's why we have such high literacy rates and men and women equally educated, boys and girls equally educated since the 60s, these sorts of things. So I don't think that refugees themselves don't really tolerate this.
Before we finish, I just want to mention a couple of people to thank along with Karen. Tara Mahfoud, wave Tara back there. She's our coordinator for our camps program, and one day if there's a just and equitable solution to the Palestinian refugees, some of Tara's work will be responsible for that. Zaki Boulos, who's in our office as well, and our faculty research director, Sally Hanafi. I'd like to thank all three of them along with Karen for being here and for all the good work you do and the example that you set for many people in the camps and outside. Thank you all for coming.